Hello and welcome to Clever-paws. This time we have a very different piece of art. It is very much inspired by medieval illustrations, especially the grotesques that adorn religious texts from the time. My interpretation of that is that they serve as a reminder of what one would have to face in the afterlife if one wasn't to keep up the study of the religious texts with due diligence. It's again an illustration that came out of my evening doodle sessions. It never fails me when it comes to surprising me with what concepts I can come up with out of seemingly nowhere. One of the features when it comes to illustrations of the High Middle Ages and the Renaissance is that one can cross anything with a snail. Mostly, of course, these crosses are with actual existing creatures rather than demons. After I had doodled the snail being crossed with the wee horned creature, I just thought it too cute to not go ahead and turning it into a full illustration at some stage, and the time for it obviously is now. To further keep it in line with medieval illustrations, I decided to use gouache for it. Of course, I am still not good at using the medium, but I feel that I begin to get the hang of it. Gouache, oil and lead are of course the best known art materials of the era, but I have seen examples of watercolor, particularly in botanical illustrations. Watercolor wouldn't work on parchment though, which was primarily used for making books, as it does not soak in the water, and of course that is what watercolor works rely on. As usual, a list of all the materials used can be found in the description below. Gouache also dries a lot faster than watercolor, which added to the challenge on hand, and of course, watercolor paper's ability to take in the water increased the drying speed of gouache again. Most areas of the illustration only require 2 layers of paint, and if I was better accustomed to it, I may have been able to do it with even fewer. First, I laid down the base color, and the second round then included shading and detailing. This also allowed me to intensify colors and to get the structure back into the snail's shell. For the horns on this little cutie, I tried blending wet colors into each other. First I laid down the gold gouache along the center of it, and then, before it had time to dry, I added black along the outlines and just let the colors mingle. There certainly is something in the makeup of gouache that makes that technique work out differently than it does in watercolors. The borders are more organic still, but very distinct as well. Even though both use gum arabic as a binder, which allows them to be mixed easily, they behave very differently, and I am glad actually to have water pots sorted into cold and warm colors, as gouache does leave pigments behind at a much grander scale than watercolors, and of course I only realized that when I was cleaning up after the arting was done. In the end, I added some line work with a dark gray that I mixed up because I didn't feel like stark black outlines. Am I proficient in using gouache yet? Well, no. Will I ever get proficient if I was to wait until I felt I was? Again, no. There's only one way to really learn to use a medium. Watching videos or reading books can get you a great theoretical base, but the use part will only come from actually using it. That is true for any medium. It is true for any skill really, be that arts, crafts, or even things we consider basics such as maths or writing. And that's why having the opportunity to experiment with mediums and techniques is so great and important. It is as important to know what one wants as it is to know what one does not want. For the past 2 months or so, my art has become a bit more experimental in general. All my pieces of the time still contain a great number of elements that I would consider to be in my comfort zone, but there is something different to all of them. Sometimes the changes I make in my approach are incremental and barely noticeable to others. Sometimes I try something radically different, from comparing various ways of doing line art to a new medium altogether. The great consequence of experimenting, of course, is to stumble upon new ways of doing things. It is as important to just generally broaden one's artistic base and thereby increasing what is considered to form part of one's comfort zone. There are more things I want to experiment with. Some will happen soon, some could be years away at this point. One thing I know will have to wait is oils, and it's not because it is supposedly so hard. Certainly different and challenging in their own right, but the main reason they'll have to wait is that I do have cats and I do not have a studio. Another experiment I'm already working on, and what will be subject of next week's video, is using a surface that at first glance would appear totally unsuited to wet medium. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall see you next week.